This content is sponsored by Minitab, the leading provider of software and services for quality improvement. An historical search of jobs requiring Lean and/or Six Sigma experience shows an increasing trend, meaning more and more employers understand that employees with the skills to streamline processes and reduce errors is important. And job candidates are seeing these requirements and looking for training so they can apply for jobs and differentiate themselves. How do I know? Because iSixSigma.com traffic is at an all-time high, and many new companies have launched in the past few years and are offering online training for Lean and Six Sigma. So here's the problem. If you're a job candidate and you search on Google or Bing for Lean Six Sigma certification, you're likely to only see the training providers paying the most to have the highest listing on the page. Or you may only be looking at the provider with the lowest advertised price. How do you, as a job candidate who is interested in gaining knowledge and skills to solve problems, figure out if an online training course is useful and worthwhile? That's what we're going to help you understand today. I'm Michael Seiger, founder and publisher of iSixSigma.com, the leading publisher and largest community of Lean and Six Sigma professionals in the world. Joining us today are 4 Lean Six Sigma thought leaders. From left to right, we have Brent Drever, CEO and Chief Learning Officer of Acuity Institute. Bill Hathaway, President of More Steam. Peter Paterka, President of Six Sigma.us. And Tom Peisdeck, President of the Peisdeck Institute. Welcome, gentlemen.
Yeah, welcome. Good to be here.
Mike. Thank you.
There are many different training courses being offered today, and I see them all advertised in a different way. What's the difference between Lean Six Sigma training, a Lean Six Sigma certificate program, and a Lean Six Sigma certification program?
That's a great question, Mike. You know, when I look at it is, as a learner, you always have to explore to understand the difference between the three. And let's start out with the certificate program. A lot of times what we see with certificate programs is it may be associated with an organization that provides certification, and all they do is provide you with a certification exam, and their expectation is for you to go learn the actual content and the topics being discussed, and then come back to them and take an exam and get a certificate from them. So a lot of times we find those are low-cost options, but what you want to look for is to say, what would be the cost of training on top of that? Then you look at training organizations, and where training comes into play, that's where you're actually learning the book of knowledge and whatever topic you're looking to explore. Let's say it's black belt. There's a black belt book of knowledge that says, here's all the content, tools, concepts I'm going to learn. And that's the training aspect. That's where you've got exercises and simulations and quizzes and, online content. So that's the foundation. That's really the learning side of it. And then when you think of the third component, which is the certification program, that's really the bundle of all of them, where you really start. And I like to look at it as you've got a learning component, which is what we just talked about. You've got a practicing component, which is where you do simulations and exercises and take a look at examples. And then you have exams associated with that as well. And then all of that combined with maybe some practical experience, and you bring that into play, that consists of a certification program from my experience.
Okay, so that makes sense. If I have already been trained at a company, but I didn't actually show that I have the knowledge, I can go someplace and take a test, and they might give me a certificate. And if I haven't been trained in the past, I may go find somebody that will do training for me, that will train me and then provide me a certificate that I completed the training and or passed their exam. And then the third and highest option is I go through an online training course. I show that I have the requisite skills to complete Lean Six Sigma projects, and then they will award me a certification if I pass their minimum standards.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's good to know that there are options for you. I mean, when you think of, I like how you started that out, where if somebody says, hey, I've gone through this for 10 years, this is what I've been doing, I never got the credentials. And I get that question. And I'm not expecting somebody to go through the entire experience. So there are options out there for you that are a little bit lower in cost, but they're not as time consuming. because you do have the experience in the background. You're just looking for that stamp of approval.
You'll often see a certificate of completion, which means only that you completed the training, however that is determined, usually coursework that may involve working through the assignments and completing any online quizzes, perhaps. That is, that's like you could equate that to the ground school portion of pilot development. So certification is a whole nother animal and generally involves multiple requirements around project work and testing to assess the capability that you're trying to build in training to determine whether that capability is really there. So certification is more the flight school where you're actually getting out and flying a plane with an instructor and proving that what you learned in ground school can actually be applied in the real world.
And I want my pilot to not only show me that they have the education and can pass a test, but also the skills to execute.
But I think the pilot training thing really, that metaphor really holds, because there are some certification providers who do testing, certified by testing, but not by practical work. So if you think about it, if you were getting on an airplane and your pilot had gone through pilot training and taken an exam, but never actually demonstrated that he could land the plane, you wouldn't be too confident. And I think the same thing holds in the employment market, where employers are not terribly confident about folks who are representing a certain level of capability who may have taken a test but haven't actually demonstrated that they can land the plane.
If students are going to invest hundreds to thousands of dollars for a training course, as well as spend 20, 40, 80 hours in the course, they want to make sure it's going to be a useful course. How can an individual looking for online Lean Six Sigma training and certification determine if a training course is academically superficial or complete and rigorous?
I think that's a great question. I think one of the first things that someone looking online for a program should look at is first off, what type of accreditations and where do they come from of the program? Do they provide continuing education units? Is it perhaps through a university? Do they offer project management credits? And then also the integrity of the organization. Are they part of the Better Business Bureau, and do they have other associations that they have? That's number one.
And I think also you might ask the training provider to provide you with some references and people who've completed the training. Certainly, they're going to give you references that speak well of them for the most part, but you can probe and you'll find things in the conversation that are worth knowing.
Yeah. And if I was going to spend a few $1,000s, I think it's worth reaching out to the provider and asking them for a few testimonials that you could email. I would definitely ask my friends if I were to spend a few $1,000s on a new car or a used car, whether they're reliable.
Also, learn a little bit more about the organization's background. Where do they come from? Where do they learn their, Lean Six Sigma experience? That's a good question to ask, because a lot of times we see that people are promoting a product where they just don't have the experience that backs it up. So you want to make sure that you're asking questions, and then also make sure that they've got the, credibility in the industry, meaning that they've got the experience, that they can talk about where they've applied Lean Six Sigma or where they've applied process improvement to make, value-added improvements in organizations. And I think sometimes, on the website, you want to talk to somebody, whether it's through email or whether it's through phone, and make sure that they're available, because the experience that you get from a marketing side is often going to be similar to the experience you get on the instructor or the general support side. So make sure that you're getting the responses that you want in a timely manner, and that they do have accessibility, because that's the risk you're going to run into is you pay a tremendous amount of money, enroll in a course, and then the person or the organization disappears behind you.
And if I send in an email and I don't get a response back for 2 days, that's indicative of the kind of support I may receive while going through the program.
I think that's definitely going to be the case. And I think actually what we experienced that you may get a longer time because a lot of organizations like to focus on the sales side. So if they're giving you a 2-day response on the sales side, you might get a 4 or 5-day response on the support side. And that's not the experience that you want. So those are the things that you can test an organization for very little effort. And you might get some, responses back that will help sway your decision to a positive outcome.
So if you think of black belt training, traditionally, when delivered in a classroom, has been anywhere from 4 to 5 weeks. Probably the predominant number is 4 weeks. So an online course, while it's a little more efficient to deliver content online than in a classroom because the pace of speaking is slower than the pace of reading, for example, an online class, a black belt ought to be something in the neighborhood of 140 hours to be the equivalent body of knowledge as that what is generally accepted to be the common curriculum for black belt. So that's the starting point is, does this course cover the curriculum that my employer is going to expect me to have mastered? And if it doesn't, then you may be paying less, but you may also not be building the full scope of capability that your employer would expect.
I've seen providers mail a printed book to a student and call that online training because the quizzes and the final certification test are administered online. I've seen other training providers that include, a video of a person at a whiteboard going through a lesson, a voice reading slides, combination of slides and a video instructor, on-screen examples while training. How does a student who's never been exposed to Lean Six Sigma before determine if the training they're considering fits with their learning style and is going to be captivating and beneficial for them?
I mean, right now, people can go out there and put together their courseware, change management, for example, beyond Six Sigma, and they can get up and going very quickly. And so the disadvantage of that, obviously, is there's a lot of people out there and a lot of confusion.
Well, in our case, Mike, we offer a free demo. So the student can take an actual lesson. They can interact with our learning management system. They can see how we use the e-learning technology, and they'll get a very good feel of what it's like to go through our training. I would say that that's something that a student may want to ask for from a training provider.
Take a look at their demos. And if their demos are providing you with valuable information, most likely that's going to translate into the learning experience you have once you're an actual student. So that's a starting point. The next one is ask yourself challenging questions around how do you like to learn? So the benefit that we have today is that we're always exposed to different video and audio and written word. And if you find yourself gravitating to, I like books, well, maybe that printed course book option is going to work great for you. Or if you like, I need that interactive nature of e-learning that has audio by an instructor, and they've got, different objects or things coming on the screen, such as text and pictures and examples. That might be something you're after. Or, pre-recorded sessions. So you're like, I'm comfortable watching more of a professional or a professor style that they sit in front of a whiteboard, and maybe it was a classroom session at one point in time. And then the second question is, find out more about the content. And here's where I'm going with this, is there's content is generally rooted in two different areas. It's either going to come from a manufacturing environment or it's going to come from a service environment. And you can have the greatest delivery, but if you're not connecting with the content, let's say they're trying to teach you, hardcore manufacturing techniques, and you're sitting there going, I'm trying to work on a process in a service environment, you're not going to connect with the content. So they might have the greatest bells and whistles around the technology they use, but then the content's going to bore you, or you're just not going to relate to it. So ask a couple different layers of questions, and I think it'll be helpful for you. And I think you deserve to have the content that's going to match up to what you're trying to accomplish in your organization, because there are differences out there.
If you can look at how much of the content is kind of passively delivered, so reading or listening or watching a video, versus that which is interactive, where there are drag and drop exercises, simulations, quizzes, activities, because you can't learn this, in my opinion and in my experience, without doing it. So content that's really passive is usually a lot less expensive to build. So therefore, it's generally less expensive to purchase, but may not deliver the level of capability that you're looking for.
Does training content need to be updated frequently? And how can a student determine if a training course they're considering is updated frequently enough?
Well, I think the body of knowledge, thankfully, has started to stabilize, because that used to be in such a state of flux that no one really knew what it meant to be a Six Sigma black belt or green belt. So thankfully, there is now a core body of knowledge that is stable enough that you can actually be accredited, have your training accredited, meaning that it addresses all of that body of knowledge. I think applications is where things change. And as you say, there's a lot in service and a lot in healthcare, and even government is using Lean Six Sigma, although it's debatable how well. My personal belief is that Lean Six Sigma is a general method for improving any kind of business process, and that it applies whether the processes are healthcare processes or service processes. And so we include a variety of different practice exercises where people will see, here's an application in a hospital, here's an application in a back office, and so on.
So what I think is an absolute must is that your training provider is updating their content routinely to stay current. So an example is, let's say the training course you're going into is associated with some statistical analysis software, and the statistical analysis software provider brings forth a new release. You want to make sure that your content reflects that new release. That's a must be.
Now, I will say one thing that they should look at, and we didn't talk about that as much earlier, is what type of software are they using? Are they using a mainstream software that's commercially available, or are they using something homegrown that nobody else uses? It's not something that if you're trying to get a job and you say, I've been using, Peter's software in Excel that he wrote last night, I don't think that would be beneficial. And so look at the software version. What software version are they using in their training?
Yeah, great point. Quick break from our sponsor. Anyone watching this video knows that it's the skills that are important, not just the education. The education is a means to gain the skills to solve problems. How well can you, as a trained Lean Six Sigma practitioner, use the tools to solve real business problems? So my question to you is, how can a student determine if a training course they're considering will provide a proper transfer of skills and not just a cursory overview and basic knowledge of the topics?
Yeah, what's interesting about that is you have to dive into the questions, like, doing your homework, as we talked earlier, is how are they introducing information? And when you introduce information, you want to make sure that you are provided the opportunity to do simulations, you're provided the opportunity to do exercises, look at examples, because that's how you're going to connect with the content. That's the first step. And then the challenge is, how can you take that skill that you just learned through maybe a practice simulation and now apply it in your organization? That's the leap. And the challenge that we're faced with, and I'll give you an example, because I've had the opportunity to work with thousands of Lean Six Sigma practitioners over the last 15 years. And what I can say is that, let's say black belt, you may learn 200 tools and concepts in the black belt curriculum. Now, it's not practical to expect that you have to transfer all of that knowledge into your next project. And I've seen really great projects execute 10 tools to get to a tremendous result. And then their next project, they use 5 different tools on top of the 10 that they already used. So what happens with that knowledge that you actually acquired in the learning process? Well, you want to make sure you're able to go back to it, and you're able to replay some of the examples and the exercises and simulations. So when you do need it, But the transfer of skills really happens through sound learning practices, through simulations and examples and exercises. That sets this really solid foundation. And then the application is where you have to have that memory recall or going back to your materials to say, I think I need this. Now, how do I do it again? Because like statistics is a good example, is you're not going to use all the statistics you learn in Black Belt in your first project. You may use 5% of it. So you want to be able to go back in case you do need it down the road.
There are a lot of skills that surround the more technical aspects of Lean Six Sigma. People often say the soft stuff is the hard stuff. So we spend a lot of time necessarily teaching the hard stuff, the statistical analysis. Ultimately, success or failure is often determined by how well you can manage the softer elements of managing change. And I mean, ultimately, if you're going to lead a project, you're going to have to convince people to do something they don't want to do. So interpersonal communications are at a premium. And that's why most corporate Lean Six Sigma deployers who use online learning are using it in a broader design that is mixing in elements of live workshops, coaching, and project work on top of online learning.
I think they need to look at whether or not the course requires a project, and if it's a real world project. I find that even though people go through my training, they take the exam and they do quite well on it, their first project upload is, let's say, crude, in need of improvement. And they need the coaching, the personal coaching from an expert to help them understand what's needed in a project.
I remember going through Greenbelt training at General Electric way back in 1995. Without a black belt coach, I would have made error upon error in completing my first project, which would have wasted my time and really made me frustrated. But training has improved in the past 20 years. Do you think that coaching of students in online training courses is mandatory today? And if so, at what training levels should a coach be provided?
Well, it really depends on the individual. My experience is that engineers, for example, let's take one extreme. An engineer who's been in a plant and has a lot of experience working with process improvement in general, who then takes a black belt course, who has the context already to understand how all these tools are applied, is probably not going to need a lot of coaching, maybe some coaching on the soft skills, but on the more technical tools, their mentality is just give it to me and let me figure it out. The other extreme would be someone who's coming from a business environment where they haven't been exposed to process improvement. Maybe they're in HR or in finance or sales and marketing, where this is all kind of new and it's a little more difficult to see how it applies, perhaps. And their learning style may be different. They may be more social by nature, and they may need a little bit more coaching. That can be accomplished a lot of different ways. Or it could be informal networks. It could be an informal coach. It could be a more formal coach. It could be a contractual arrangement with a consultant. It could be accomplished many ways.
When I first came up with the PieStick Institute, I intended to put all of my live training online and present it with a live coach. That was my plan. The problem is that a master black belt who's an expert and as well as a good coach demands pretty good pay. And to do that, we had to price the training at a level that really wasn't competitive. So what we've done is for green belt and black belt, we have optional coaching. And for those, we also have review and feedback on the practice exercises.
Well, I think I agree with you that things have evolved in the last 15, 20 years. And I, like you, through my initial experience, I needed a coach because I just didn't have those references and resources readily available to me. Where things have changed is when you're in an online environment, what you have access to is an instructor. And I want to make sure that every learner knows the importance of the instructor and that they can always reach out to an instructor with questions. So as you're going through the training component of your Lean Six Sigma journey, is make sure you've got an instructor to reach out to with questions. And sometimes it's just not the instructor, sometimes it's that general support. So that goes back to our earlier conversation around making sure support's in place, but instructor.
Okay. Right or wrong, if someone tells me that they went to MIT or Harvard Business School, I think they're likely very intelligent. Is the reputation and prestige of a Lean Six Sigma training provider something that should be considered by a student?
Well, I think so, because the students generally getting this certification or skill set to obtain employment or to get a promotion or better pay on their current job. And if the employer hasn't heard of the training provider, or if the reputation is less than stellar, they're not really going to know what you've learned or what your skill set is. So I think, again, as you say, rightly or wrongly, we all put a lot of weight on the reputation of the merchant, if we're buying products, or the service provider for buying a service.
And this is an environment where there's no real third-party accreditation that's meaningful. There's not the folks that are out there have kind of set up shop for commercial reasons to sell online testing or to charge a fee for accreditation, and they're not. It's not like the industry came together and said, let's have this member-driven kind of accreditation. ASQ fills that role to some extent, but in that environment where there's not really anything you can point to, then the marketplace gives you a signal. So if you're looking for a provider and if that provider has been successfully delivering training for a lot of large corporate customers, it gives you some assurance that someone's really looked under the hood. So the difference between retail or an individual and a corporate deployment is that someone who's running a large deployment for a multinational is going to take the time to really look at the online content, to really understand what the curriculum is, at what level the mastery is being developed, how the practice exercises are structured. And it's a bit of a proxy, I suppose.
Yeah, one thing they have to be careful about is there's a lot of institutions out there that are offering programs that it's not even them. They're just rebranding it. And they're just collecting the money on it.
Does continuing education credit matter when looking at Lean Six Sigma online training providers?
It frankly doesn't tell you anything, because anybody can offer CEUs. Project Management Institute does at least a cursory review of content that offers a PDU or professional development unit. But it's not probably the level of assurance that you might hope that it would be to see stamps of approval of various sorts on websites.
But the credibility, I think is important. I think you look at that, because if you do continuing education or project management, there's a process they go through. And they look at it and they review it and so forth. I think it's very important for vendors out there to address that and go through that process.
We have a lot of students who are certified PMPs, and they want professional development units from their training because they need that for recertification, as do ASQ people. And I think if that's something important to you, you should certainly consider it.
When we think of Lean Six Sigma, we find a lot of individuals that are associated with project management take Lean Six Sigma courses. And so let's take, for instance, somebody that has their PMP or they're a project management professional through the Project Management Institute. And they're required to have on an annual basis continuing education units or PDUs, professional development units. That's a starting point. You want to reach out to organizations that do provide PDUs and are registered with the Project Management Institute. That's a good starting point. And so I find that when organizations go through the effort to get accreditation and provide CEUs and PDUs, it means they're serious about what they do. And they're actually listening to their student population that say, we need this because it's part of my continuing education.
As I mentioned at the start of the show, costs for Lean Six Sigma online training vary widely by provider. How should students think about the pricing options when evaluating training programs?
Well, I'll tell you what, Michael, and there are some people who feel that the more money they pay, the better. There's a few people that they have a good feeling about that. I think there is some, you get what you pay for. If you pay the $29 and you get your certificate, and you get a piece of paper. I won't even give it a certificate name. You get a piece of paper, that's certainly probably not worth the $29. I think there's a range, and I think the reputable vendors are out there are similar in a similar range.
Well, the first thing they should look at is what's the level of content. So how much is really there? The price varies widely, but the course duration and curriculum also varies widely. So if you don't look carefully, you may be, for example, purchasing a Greenbelt course that is 20 or 30 or 40 hours long. And the standard, if there is one, is more like 80. Typically, it's been historically a couple weeks of training, so more like 80 hours. So if your Greenbelt course is less than 80 hours, you may be paying a lot less money, but you may also not be getting you may not be getting the curriculum that an employer would expect. Likewise with Black Belt training, which has historically been 4 to 5 weeks in a classroom. So you should be looking for an online course that's something in the neighborhood of 140 hours. Online training is a little more efficient than classroom learning, just because the pace of delivery is faster. But if you're less than that, then you should wonder, are you really getting a body of knowledge that aligns with common practice? And one way to know is to look at CEUs. Actually are kind of a 1 to 10 relationship. So if you get 4 CEUs, that tells you that it's a 40-hour course. Although that's not foolproof either, because some providers will include the time taken to work on a project and give you CEUs for that. And so it's a little misleading. So you might see 18 CEUs and think, well, this is 180 hours long. But the fine print says, well, that includes the project work. Maybe it's 100 hours of project work. So you have to ask some questions and to sort it out.
I think you should look at what you get. I've looked at programs, for example, that look like they're providing you with black belt training and certification, but they give you a 30-day window. And we have 180 hours in our Lean Six Sigma black belt program. If you can squeeze that into 30 days, you're a better man than I am. Or they won't include software, or they won't include a textbook, or they won't include, fill in the blank. They charge extra for those things. And so be sure that you're actually getting the entire package, what you actually need, before you consider it low cost. I was once charged by a car dealer for the spare tire. I thought that should have been included, but it wasn't. So there are a lot of ways to get the cost down, and it's not the true cost.
Yeah, it's the greatest thing about the internet and online education is you can see costs, and you can find the cost that meets your budget. And with that, you also need to understand that with cost, you can have downsides or upsides. So let's start out with where we started our conversation with, a certificate. Generally, that's going to be your least expensive option. And you may have great experience and you may pay a few $100s to go get a certificate because you just want to put a bow on your overall experience to say, I am certified in Lean Six Sigma as a black belt or a green belt or yellow belt and so forth. So that's a starting point. So you can find a lower cost option there. Now, if you want to step it up a little bit and say, you know what, I've had a little bit of exposure, but I really need to bring all of it together. And then you can say my cost is going to be a little bit more. And then you look at the level of support. Do they have instructors available? Is their content routinely managed, as we discussed earlier? And those are important questions to ask. So what I find with cost is it goes up with the level of content, how well is it developed, the level of support you receive. And then as we talked about prestige, then your cost even goes higher.
If you have additional questions about choosing the right Lean Six Sigma online training provider, please post them in the comments below this video on isixsigma.com, and I'll ask our panel of industry experts to come back and answer them. Brent Drever, Bill Hathaway, Peter Paterka, and Tom Peisdeck, thank you for coming on iSixSigma.com, helping future students understand what questions to ask and how to properly evaluate Lean Six Sigma online training providers. And thanks for helping us all become better change agents and business leaders.
Thanks
For
Mike.
having
Thank you
me,
very
Tim.
much.
Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Mike. I want to compliment you on providing this. I think it's going to be of great value to people looking for Six Sigma training.